everybody's attention? In case you didn't know, I'm Delegate Bill Hamilton. I represent Upshur County. Thank you. And, God, you're embarrassed. In the Upshur County 45th District, and this is not for me tonight, this is for our Attorney General, Patrick Morrisey, and he is having town hall meetings throughout West Virginia, which I think is taking a precedent that's never been done by the Attorney General's office. But I won't give you a long bio on, because he's got a lot of things he needs to discuss tonight with us. But he's graduate of Rutgers, don't hold that against him, in Rutgers Law School, and he's been an attorney since 1992, practicing in several large firms and concentrating on health issues and insurance, etc. And we're certainly glad to have him. And just as a side note, I can tell you he's really great to work with. When we had the infamous, gotta check my notes now on this, 44-9, that went to the, thank God, the Senate. Our Senator Tucker's here tonight. Thank God the Senate Judiciary didn't take the bill up. But it was basically going to cut all his powers out and eliminate them. But I was able to make an amendment on that bill, even though it was a terrible bill, was to give the Attorney General prosecutorial powers in West Virginia. I think it's very embarrassing for West Virginia when we have to call a federal prosecutor in to investigate election fraud and the nonsense that's going on in Mingo County and etc. And I think our Attorney General should have the power to do that if he can't work with the local prosecutors, and that's generally the way it works now. But with no more to do, I'll introduce our Attorney General, Patrick Morrisey.
That's too warm a welcome when you don't even know what I'm going to say yet. By the way, so thank you all very much for coming, and I appreciate the delegate and the senator for coming, and everyone here. Because especially with the break in the weather, when you have a chance to be outside and really enjoying some beautiful weather for the first time in a little while, I'm really grateful that you all decided to come here tonight and listen to what's going on in the Attorney General's office, and also just give me an opportunity to learn a little bit more about what's going on in Upshur County. Because I take this concept, this town hall concept, very seriously, that by traveling around the state and visiting all the counties, you can learn about all the unique challenges that West Virginia faces. Because the needs of Upshur County are different than the needs of Jefferson County or Nicholas County or Capital County. And by traveling to these different counties, you can hear what's on the people's minds. That's important because ultimately I work for you. And I take that very, very seriously. Now, what I typically do during these town hall sessions to provide a little bit of a background of what we've been doing since I took office in January of 2013. And then after that, I explained some of the authorities of the office and different ways that we try to advance economic growth in the state of West Virginia. And a lot of times people say, well, what does the Attorney General have to do with economic growth? And the answer is quite a lot. And so we'll walk through some of the different ways that the Attorney General's office might be able to help West Virginia reach her potential. And then after talking about those topics, I want to open it up to you to get your thoughts and to hear your questions about what we're doing in the office and different things that we can do better to help the state of West Virginia. So we have a little close to about an hour or so. We'll be able to walk through a lot of different topics. I'd say there are just a couple ground rules that I put in place. I try to answer as many questions as I can. If I don't know the answer to a particular question, I'll try to get back to you. If you ask me a question about a pending investigation, I'm sure you'll appreciate that I have certain limits under the law that I can't talk about open and pending investigations. So I ask that you respect that. In addition, to the extent that you're asking about some matters that are currently being litigated by the state, I may have to defer on those as well, because we have to make sure that we're speaking to the judge. Ultimately, we don't want things to be taken out of context, and I have a lot of respect for the judges of our state, and I want to make sure that we're framing our arguments appropriately. But with those as the ground rules, I try to answer as many questions as I can, and ultimately be accountable to you. Now let me start out and just give you a brief overview as to some of the things that we have been working on since taking office. Beginning in January 2013, I started focusing on recruiting and improving quality in the Office of Attorney General. Because ultimately, I want the West Virginia Attorney General's office to be known as one of the top law firms in the state. I also want the West Virginia Attorney General's office to be known as one of the best Attorney General's offices in the country. But to accomplish that, you have to go out and recruit. In the same way that WVU has to go out and recruit top athletes for their football program or their basketball team, I have to go out and recruit top lawyers. Well, fortunately, we've been successful in some of those recruiting efforts. Since the beginning of my tenure in office, we've been able to recruit 2 former U.S. Supreme Court clerks to join. That's very positive. There aren't many state AG offices in the country that even have 1 former U.S. Supreme Court clerk. And I think that a couple states have 2. I've challenged my team to say, why don't we get 3? Why don't we become known as one of the best AG offices in the country? And that'll be something that people can really be proud of, that the West Virginia AG's office is really pushing out quality legal work at every turn. In addition to having former U.S. Supreme Court clerks, we have terrific lawyers who have worked in prosecutors' offices, who have worked at the Ethics Commission, and ultimately who have achieved great success in the private sector. So we're trying to put together a very good team, and I think that the results are beginning to show. Now, in addition to focusing on quality and ensuring that we're recruiting good people to work in the office, we also put our mind to pushing forward important ethics reforms from the first day that I arrived in Charleston. One of those, I think some of the elected officials are very familiar with. It's a concept of what you do with settlement money. And I've said from the very beginning that the legislature controls the power of the purse. And I have a great deal of respect for the legislature. So what I did is within the first few weeks of taking office, I went and I met with the governor, and I talked about having a broad new agreement between the Attorney General's office, the legislature, and the governor to ensure that after the AG's office has 3 years of operating revenue to manage its consumer division, every other penny would get returned to the general fund. That's where it belongs. Well, the governor and I reached this agreement, and I think all of the legislators here today were a strong partner in that effort. And since January of 2013, our office has proactively returned $16.5 million back to the state general fund. That's something that we did voluntarily, and because it's good government, it's the right thing to do. That's your money. That's not our office's money. So it's critical that that ethics reform was put in place, and I'm hopeful over the long run to see that cemented into law so that future attorneys general can't do mischief with the people's money. The second major reform that we put in place after taking office was to change how outside counsel were hired. Gone are the days of the friends and family plan out of the Attorney General's office. Now, we have a system that's much more transparent and open. It's called a competitive bidding process for how you hire outside counsel. So now, for every single instance, when we hire outside counsel, you can go to the website and you can look at who we've hired and why we've hired them. Why we think we need to rely on outside counsel instead of having people within our office work on a particular matter. You can look at that, you can evaluate our decisions as to whether we made the right decision to hire a particular firm. But it's all on the internet, it's all transparent. The other key component for this new policy is that it saves West Virginia taxpayers a tremendous amount of money. The new competitive bidding policy, since it's been implemented in July of 2013, has already saved the state of West Virginia approximately $3.9 million. That's just for having lawyers get paid a little bit less than what they were making in the past. I think that's good government, and it's something we need to do more of in the state of West Virginia. Now, beyond those policies, we've also been at work of really converting the Attorney General's office and focusing on matters that it really historically hadn't been focused on. One of them, of course, is challenging federal overreach. I think all of us are very familiar with what the EPA has been trying to do to our state's economy. Well, for the first time ever, our state Attorney General's office now has the capability to fight back. Gone are the days when the governor had to go to Attorney General and get him kicking and screaming to get involved in defending the state from EPA overreach. Now we have lawyers that go through these regulations and review every line of every paragraph, of every page, of every document in order to make sure that these regulations adhere to the rule of law. We also want to make sure that if the West Virginia economy is negatively impacted, we're going to be aware of it, and that positions us to take action in a proactive way. So we've been focusing a lot on federal overreach, and I think that's critically important for the future of our state. Our office has also been focusing on a number of other important initiatives. For the first time ever, we have a substance abuse function within the office. We all know that the office is charged with consumer protection enforcement, and we take that very, very seriously. We've been very busy trying to educate people about scams, and then of course respond to complaints, and file lawsuits and settle lawsuits when appropriate. But we also are spending a bit of time now on substance abuse prevention, because we think that that's a terrible plague that's facing the state of West Virginia. And we want to be able to contribute our part to try to reduce this terrible problem. We cannot consign another generation of people to this terrible epidemic. So the office is involved in quite a bit, but we also are engaged in the day-to-day practice of law for all of our state agencies and boards. Right now, on a regular basis, we represent over 60 different state agencies and boards on a wide variety of different issues. We can provide counseling work to them. We could be involved in litigation. The types and the complexity of the legal work can vary tremendously. We represent the DHHR, so we can be involved in a wide variety of healthcare issues. We can be involved in employment issues. We represent the tax department. So we have a number of lawyers busy working, handling tax-related issues every day. We also represent the DMV. We have 12 lawyers who do DMV work for the state. In addition, we serve as the attorneys who represent the state on criminal matters before the West Virginia Supreme Court. So we have about 11 people in our appellate division. So if you think about it from this perspective, if there's a legal issue involving state government, we're very likely to be involved. So that keeps us busy. In fact, the day-to-day work with state agencies and boards, that represents about 80% of what we do every day. Now, it would be remiss of me if I also didn't spend a little bit of tonight on some breaking news that occurred today, a really good development for West Virginia. I mentioned at the beginning that we spend a lot of time on consumer protection. Well, I take that very, very seriously. Well, today we announced what could be a landmark settlement for the state of West Virginia, where we've been able to recoup $22 million as a result of a settlement with a drug maker. That's very, very positive, and I think that's going to allow for plugging of certain budget holes here in the state of West Virginia. And it's also going to allow the state agencies that I've represented here in order to recoup some of the costs that they paid for these medicines that were allegedly involved in a faulty marketing campaign. So we take our responsibilities very seriously in terms of consumer protection. And the reason that we do is our philosophy in the office is to represent the citizens as a whole and ensure that the rule of law is adhered to. We want to make sure that the people of West Virginia know that we will treat everyone the same regardless of political affiliation or economic status. You just can't mess around with the law, and we won't do it. So that's a bit of what we've been doing since I've taken office in January of 2013. But usually, at this point in the town hall, we also talk a little bit about some of the things that we're trying to do to advance the state economically. Because I believe that every elected official has a duty to do everything in his or her power to drive our state forward from an economic perspective. And now you may ask, what does the Attorney General's office have to do with economic issues? Well, the answer is it can have quite a lot to do with it, and we could be a real force to help West Virginia reach her potential. Let's start with a couple basic premises. Do you all think that the law can be ambiguous? Anyone? I think a few people know that it can. So the West Virginia Attorney General's office speaks for the legal interest of the state. That means that we can issue legal opinions and we can clarify ambiguous parts of the law. This has actually been something that's been very effective in different counties across the state because we've been able to obtain legal requests from some of the local prosecutors and then we write a response, sometimes bringing clarity to consumers or even regulated businesses. Because what people want most of all is predictability and certainty. That certainly could be a driver of economic growth in the state of West Virginia. We're also in a position as the lawyers for so many of our state agencies and boards to provide them with good counsel, perhaps to help them comply with laws, but do so in a less burdensome perspective. To the extent that we could shave a couple of basis points off of the cost of doing business in the state of West Virginia, that's a positive thing. And so if we can become a little bit more creative about ways we can reduce regulatory burdens in West Virginia, I think that can allow West Virginia's economy to become much more competitive with neighboring states. In addition, as you guys all know, and we talked about a little bit earlier, West Virginia's Attorney General's office controls litigation for the state of West Virginia. So, when the EPA issues these regulations, which will have such a devastating effect on our economy, the West Virginia AG's office can step forward, we can submit comments, and ultimately we can file suit and use all legal tools available in order to protect our citizens from some of these negative federal actions. So litigation can certainly have a very positive effect. But the office can also be involved in a wide variety of other issues. I mentioned that we created a substance abuse task force at the beginning of the meeting. I think that's critically important for the future of our state because we can position ourselves to rid ourselves of this terrible epidemic. And I think substance abuse is a jobs issue. So if we can make a little bit of progress every single month and ensure that we're not leading the state in drug overdose rates, I think that's important. So using our consumer protection powers and our investigative tools, that can lead to positive developments from a business perspective and a regulatory perspective. So there's so many things that we can do, but I can only do these things when we get some really good ideas from people in all the 55 counties. Because once again, the needs of Upshur County are different than the needs of other counties around the state. So I want to make sure that I come and hold these town halls so I can hear exactly what's on your mind here in Upshur County, and then I can take that back with me to Charleston and try to apply it and do positive things for the state of West Virginia. So that's what we've been working on, and I wanted to give you that background before we go to the Q&A session, because I think it's critical that you know what your state officials are doing. Because ultimately, you pay the bill, and we're accountable to you. And I take seriously, while I'm the state's lawyer, and I represent all these state agencies and boards, I also represent citizens collectively. And I want to make sure that I'm your legal voice in Charleston. We've tried to mix things up in Charleston since I've taken office. We've tried to run the office in a very professional manner, but we look under the hood a little bit. And we're not satisfied with the status quo. What I'd like to get out of tonight is some of your ideas as to how we can do even more. Because I think we have a lot of talented people in the room here, and with your ideas and a little bit of energy, I think there's no stopping West Virginia. We have incredible assets in our state. We're the third largest producer of energy in the United States. We're competitive from a wage perspective, which means we can lure more jobs here. And we certainly are in a strategic geographic location. We're literally within 10 hours of about 180 million people. That means that we have an awful lot of opportunity to sell our goods and services to many people around the country. So let's begin tonight and work together to develop more of those ideas and think about the different things that I can take back with me to Charleston to help serve you better as your Attorney General. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions from you and see what we can gain out of tonight. Thank you. Let's start with let's start with any questions that folks may have. Sir?
I got a question. And you talked about this going to Farm Bureau dinner.
I'm sorry?
Me and you talked about this, about the Farm Bureau dinner, about these gas prices. You can go to Flatwoods and it's $3.63 a gallon. Here it's $3.87. Now you told me you was going to check into that and see what's going on. Have you done any checking or?
So we are constantly looking at the fluctuation of gas prices around the state, and we've been continually gathering evidence to best evaluate that. What we found is that there's real variance in different parts of the state. Flatwoods, the Eastern Panhandle, and there are different places where some of the gas is derived from, different parts of the country. So we are looking at that. We continue to do so. I know that there are a couple members of the legislature that I've been talking to that are trying to provide me with some additional information. So we're in that phase, and as I mentioned earlier, as we're evaluating and investigating different issues, we can't always comment on all the particulars, but rest assured, I'm sensitive of the variation in gas prices that occur around the state.
Well, on the news it kept saying it's supposed to be going down, but here it goes up. So I mean, I just want to know if there's anything that you can do with the gas prices, because you go 10 miles down the road and there's 15 cents difference from Buchanan to Weston to Elton.
Sure. So as I said, we continually take a look at that. I know it's a complex issue in terms of how all the prices are coming together, and I know that the legislature has been looking at these issues as well, but we will continue to focus on that because I think there has to be some rational explanation as to why there is variance in the prices. And I'm sensitive to it. I know I can give you from experience. I'm from Jefferson County, West Virginia. And as you drive over the border into Virginia, there can be dramatic differences in gas prices. I want to make sure that West Virginia has access to the best possible prices and that people are not paying more at the pump, whether it's through certain types of actions that are occurring in the marketplace or through the tax structure. So I take that very seriously, and I've definitely heard the complaints of a lot of people across the state. This is not something that's solely in the purview of the Attorney General's office. We have a role to play, the legislature and others have a role to play, and we're going to be working with everyone to at least get to the bottom of these issues. Thank you. Next question. Sir.
Well, I'm on the school board, and the schools are saddled with more and more responsibility of a legal nature. We have a hearing almost every week of a student who's using drugs, passing them around. We have to expel the student. We have an alternative school. We've had to double the size of the alternative school. We have a Pro-Start program, deputy sheriffs in the high school, the middle school, probably next year in the elementary school. This is a very expensive proposition, taking away from education. But you mentioned the substance abuse problem. It's going to sink us. We even had jobs here in drilling.
Right.
People knew they had to pass a urine test to get the job, could not pass the urine test, didn't get the job.
Right.
I mean, this is a big issue. Probably not a legal issue, but we're spending money on the legal front right now.
We certainly are, and one of the things, sir, that we are trying to do through the creation of the Substance Abuse Task Force is we're trying to get out proactively in the community so we can educate people about the dangers of drugs. We know that there is an epidemic in the state of West Virginia, and depending upon where you live, you may have a bad heroin problem, or you may have a synthetic problem, or you may have a prescription pill issue, or there could be problems with meth. So what we found is there's variance across all the different counties. So what we've done as part of our Substance Abuse Task Force is we have a number of individuals in our office who work in our Consumer Protection Division who are now trained, who've been working with law enforcement on this, to go proactively out to schools, to community centers, to senior centers, to educate people about the perils of substance abuse. Look, that alone is not going to address the issue, but we have to be vigilant and do as much education as possible because it really can make a difference. From my perspective, substance abuse is a very complex matter, and you have to go after it from an educational, a supply, and a demand perspective. But this is just one thing that we're trying to do. Keep in mind that we had no resources in this space prior, but I've tried to reformulate the office in a manner that people are working a little bit longer hours, and we're actually doing a little bit more in terms of getting out in front on substance abuse matters. So I'm hopeful that some of the educational works will pay off. We're not going to see the results of that overnight, but certainly we should be working in partnership with our sister agencies in law enforcement to do as much educational work as possible. So we're happy to coordinate with you. I have a consumer representative here tonight, Pam Krashansky, who works in tandem with different people in our office to get out and do some of these substance abuse presentations. So I say this to anyone, if you think that you want someone from our office to come by and to do an educational presentation that might impact some people, we want to do it. We want to hit as many places as possible. I think that's critical.
Well, we've added more counselors, we have 3 nurses, we've added school-based clinics. I mean, these things have to be funded though, and that usually is where it starts. But it's good to dialogue because we lose, children actually die every year of overdoses, and sometimes 2, 3, or 4 at a time.
Look, as you guys know, West Virginia has the highest drug overdose rate in the nation. That's unacceptable.
No.
And we need to put more energy into addressing this issue. So what we've tried to do is we're trying to add value without duplicating, because I don't want to do the same thing as a local sheriff or a local prosecutor, but I do think there are different areas where we can be helpful. Obviously, education is one space. Through the power of litigation, as people know, we're involved in certain lawsuits. There may be a way we can make some changes to how suspicious orders are reported in the state of West Virginia. But there's so many different components to this. We're trying to add a little bit of our resources to make a difference. One thing we hope to learn over the course of the upcoming weeks, we're going to be soon submitting a writ to the West Virginia Supreme Court to make it clear what some of our authorities are. The ability to help prosecutors out in different instances. Because there was a court case last year that changed some of the authorities of the office that we think allows us to get involved in criminal matters. We're trying to work with the Supreme Court and prosecutors the right way so that people know that we'll never try to duplicate a prosecutor's office, but we might be able to provide a little bit of help. In most states in the country, the Office of Attorney General plays a really pivotal role in a lot of the criminal matters. We think that's appropriate here, but I never want to displace the prosecutor because I think they play a very important role. We want to work in a collaborative manner with them, but so that they know that there's an alternative. It's not just the U.S. Attorney's Office, it's the local prosecutor, also working with the State Attorney General's office. So that's something we're also focusing on. Sure. Next question. Sir.
West Virginia, running a business is a challenge. We all know the obstacle. I know with the economic squeeze, different government sections can come up with new regulations, new ways of creating revenue. That's short-term has short-term benefit but long-term consequences. We need to make it easier for business, to conduct business, And the next thing I want to lead to is the frivolous lawsuits. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. I used to manage supermarkets for about 17 years. You have ambulance chasers there. Anybody out there to make a buck, In West Virginia, we should think in terms of limiting frivolous lawsuits. There has to be some consequences. Not only the party that filed the suit, but also the attorney. This way, they will not take upon frivolous lawsuits, to milk the insurance companies, then squeeze the small business people in the area. I know this is going to take some political, legislative work, but I think that would help tremendously in West Virginia. We got 2 businesses, and it's always a challenge. If you do well, people is always, how can I get some money out of this pocket? That's not right. The judicial system should protect people that conduct business here. That's part of economic growth. That's part of having an economic atmosphere where we prosper. Otherwise, what is the use of having a business? That's why you have a lot of young kids, okay? They get discouraged. Okay? There's no future for them. And the same thing with business people. I see business open up in town here, and my son said, now it's time to go, it's not going to be around next year. Because the climate is not conducive to good business. People have to have money to spend, right? So someone has a good idea, but what good does it do?
So you raise a number of important issues here. One of the things that I've tried to be very sensitive to since becoming your Attorney General is I want to make sure that West Virginia is known for having a very positive legal climate. And I've tried to take a number of steps unilaterally to make that happen. The first thing that we tried to do was reform how settlement money was handled. Because in the past, I think there were some abuses to how that was managed. I want to make sure that people know that we're not going to be inappropriately incentivized, if you will, so that you're not just suing people for the wrong reasons. We want to make sure that we're known as vigorous enforcers of the law, but that we're known for being fair and predictable. And I can safely say every time we bring a lawsuit, I take that very, very seriously, and I want to make sure that all the ducks are lined up and that things are handled the right way. So changing how settlement money was handled was important because once we had our consumer protection revenue, and then we know that every other penny goes to the general fund, you remove some of the inappropriate incentives to sue. You want to sue when it's appropriate, not when it's not. That's the first part. The second part is we changed how outside counsel were hired in the state. And we did that because we wanted to make sure that there wasn't just a small number of members of the bar who ended up getting all these big awards. We think that if we put things out for competitive bid, we let any lawyer who's qualified submit a request to get legal work for the states. The other thing that we did is we reduced some of the fees that are earned when some of these awards are finalized for the state. So we've changed that, and that's part of what's resulted in the savings of close to $4 million alone from our competitive bidding policy. So I hear what you're saying. I think the legal climate, having a positive legal climate is very important in the state of West Virginia. Those are some of the steps I've tried to take. There are obviously other steps that can be taken from a legislative perspective. But I always want to make sure that we're weighing in to have that good legal climate, but of course while preserving the right of an individual to obtain justice through the judicial system. Because I think that's critical as well. There always has to be a balancing here, and I, as Attorney General, want to make sure that we speak out for those issues. Next question. Sir?
I'm just curious, I know there's another lawsuit percolating up through various states. I think there's about 20 states participating in, related to Obamacare and the originating House clause within the Constitution. You know what I'm speaking about?
I do.
And are we participating in that, or do you have an opinion on that? Or?
So we've actually been engaging on a number of the different lawsuits, and we're evaluating that issue. I would say this, what we're focusing on, we've been in the middle of that subsidy case because we think that the Treasury Department had illegally interpreted those rules. We've been looking at the illegal administrative fixes. I'm not sure if everyone's been following this, but you know the concept that if you like your health care plan, you can keep your health care plan? Well, that wasn't quite true under the law. And then the president ended up saying, well, regardless of the plain language of the law, we're not going to enforce that. We've been looking very closely as to whether we could or should file a lawsuit on that particular topic. So I've consistently looked for different ways that we can challenge illegal parts of Obamacare. As some of you may also know, I was involved in the initial challenge of Obamacare when it was pending in the 11th Circuit. So we continually look at different ways to do that, and I know we're taking a look at that particular case, and we're involved as amicus on a host of different matters, because I do think that Obamacare has a negative effect on the state of West Virginia, and will have a very dampening effect on economic growth across our country. You know, I will also note that at the same time, I'm the state's chief legal officer, so we have to do a wide variety of legal issues that arise under Obamacare, so we have to always balance our responsibilities. But I think it's critical whenever we see any illegal activity coming out of the Obama administration, we reach out and we try to challenge it. Got to be some more questions here. We haven't worn. Go ahead, sir.
You mentioned about the EPA, and of course we know that's involved in a lot of things that you're seeing happening in West Virginia. But what about this Clean Air Act that we're trying to cram down our necks, not only in West Virginia, but all the United States? And it's going to affect, and they hope it will affect those who want this, to eliminate our coal industry. Without coal, we in 6 and 7 other states are not going to be in good shape. That's where our surplus came for many, many years, and now it's being threatened. Not only that, but job opportunity for young people and future people that will come here and stay because of that.
Look, you're absolutely right, and I think that the future of West Virginia is inextricably tied to our energy resources. We have to be able to build on the fact that we're the second largest producer of coal in the country, and we have such potential in terms of Marcellus Shale. We have opportunities here. We won't have opportunities if the EPA is able to get away with imposing one of the most onerous regulations in our nation's history on coal-fired power plants. One of the things that we did last week in response to the regulation is we went out very quickly. We wrote a letter to EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy, and we pointed out that we thought that the section of the Clean Air Act that they were using as their authority did not give them the ability to put this regulation forward. So I think you're going to see a number of states stepping up and looking at potential legal challenges to this rule. Rest assured, if this regulation affecting existing power plant rules goes through, it's going to lead to severe economic distress in the state of West Virginia. We must get out front and fight it. And I think it's a good thing. What we've seen so far is that this is a bipartisan effort. The governor reached out to me. He had a press conference last week. It was the governor, myself, members of the congressional delegation on a bipartisan basis. I think that's good because West Virginia is always strongest when it speaks with one voice. And here, we're all working collaboratively in a way to push these EPA rules back. Now, my role, of course, is to focus on the legal deficiencies of the rule. I think there are many legal deficiencies in the rule, and if you go on our website, you'll see a very detailed 9-page letter that's starting to circulate around the country, and other AGs are looking at that because the EPA, to push this rule forward, they literally have said that they're relying on a clerical error from the 1990 Clean Air Act. Can you believe that? Pushing something through with such an incredible magnitude on the American population, and they're relying on this clerical error. They admit that if you read the plain text of the Act, they literally say this, the literal terms of the Act prohibit them from issuing this rule. I can't make this up. So we're looking at that, and we take our legal responsibilities very seriously. And I will not hesitate to put West Virginia on a brief and challenge the EPA, because we cannot allow them to ruin our way of life here in the state. We rely on energy. Our coal miners do. All the businesses that service the coal industry do. All the mom and pop small businesses that are around the coal towns. They all depend upon coal and oil and natural gas being a thriving industry. I'm not going to let them down. I'm going to fight and use everything in my power to stand up to this overreach. And I think we have good arguments. So, thank you. Good question. Any other questions that you may have? Sir?
You mentioned about the shale drilling and does any scope of the pooling come under the AG's office?
Well, I mean, we can always get questions about legal issues pertaining to pooling. I know that there was legislation that was in consideration this year. A lot of times we'll get involved after the legislation becomes law, and then we may get asked a series of legal questions. But we can always get questions that come in from our state agency clients or from prosecutors. But we haven't been involved in that pooling issue from a legal perspective to date, at least not that I'm aware of. But I know that we can always get brought in depending upon the status of the issue.
It is under the scope then of it.
It can be any legal issue, to To the extent that there's a legal issue involved with pooling, and there certainly can be legal issues involved with pooling because of the takings clause and a lot of other legal theories. So that is something that, as that advances and goes through our office, certainly can be involved.
Well, my interest was from the standpoint that in a pool, if they had 85%, 90%, 95% of the people agreeing to it, and you have a holdout of 5%, is it still, do you know if it's legal for them to go ahead and drill the well?
So one thing I won't do, I'm not going to opine on a particular issue unless I know all the facts, but what we typically do is when we get those requests in, we take a close look at it, and then we look at the law, and then we would issue a legal opinion. So if questions like that were to come in, we would then try to address that. But you know, it's difficult in a context. What I've always found is that if you kind of opine generally, you get yourself in trouble. You always have to look at all the specific facts. You have to look at the law, and then you ultimately make a decision. So that's the kind of analysis we would engage in if questions like that came to us. But thank you. Next question. Any other questions?
Just want to comment on, it seems like when they have a national average, they show on national news about West Virginia compared to other states, we're always 5 cents or more ahead. Now, I assume some of that is used for road building, construction, things of this sort. But why are we always above the national average?
I'm sorry, you said we're above a national average, but then you didn't specify what we're...
On the gasoline.
On the gasoline price.
Yes.
So your question is, why are we above the national average? Look, we're looking at all of these issues. We want to know why there's variance in terms of gas prices. And I think that there probably are a host of different issues. I know that our tax rates are different than other states in terms of gas tax. For example, West Virginia is higher than Virginia and some of the other states. But there could be a host of different issues involved. Those are the kinds of things that we look at. And I know that the Attorney General's office has looked at this issue over the past 20 years. This is not something just new to my office, but we're always trying to get down to the bottom of it because it's a consistent comment that I hear across the state. So as we continue to get more information, we obviously will try to make that available.
Well, I know when it was then Governor Manchin, they were looking into the investigation of why we were getting gouged on our gasoline. And I never heard the results of that, but yet we're being gouged.
So my predecessor was involved in that and launched an investigation, and then it stopped because I, quite frankly, believe that they weren't able to get to the bottom of why all the price variations occur. And so they did a report, but then there was no additional enforcement action. And so when I took office, that was one of the first questions I asked about what the status of that was. And we continually look at that issue. It is a complicated issue because of the nature of how our laws are structured in West Virginia. We continually try to review that and address that to see what's the difference. Are these market-based differences? Are they tax-based differences? Or are they just based upon the structure of our laws? Or is there some other inappropriate conduct that's going on which is driving that result? So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at. I know that the legislature has looked at some of those issues as well, and that if I recall right, there's going to be a study of that. Is that right? There's going to be a study of that. So we want to, of course, work with the folks who are putting that study together on the legislative side to see what information we could share, because it's important to be informed before you ever take any action. So thank you.
Thank you.
First of all, I'd just like to make a comment and thank you on your office writing a meekness briefs in the face, especially the Chesapeake Bay case there, and that was something we never had in prior AG office. And the other question I have is the new water rules of the U.S. Have you looked at it, or are you planning on making comments?
So we are looking at that now. We've actually, we were doing a lot of analysis on that, and then the EPA Clean Air Act rule came out last week. So that's something I know I'm going to go back and be probably doing some reading on that over the next week or two. We do plan to submit comments on that and be very involved. If I recall correctly, the comments are due sometime in July.
It actually got extended to
Did it just get extended?
20th.
To what? To
October 20th.
October 20th, okay. So the answer is yes, we do plan on submitting comments on that topic. And of course, we try to work with our DEP and others to try to have the most coherent set of comments that's going to help the state of West Virginia. But that is something that we've been concerned about because early indications are that they're taking an overly broad view of what their authorities are in terms of defining navigable waters. And we've heard of different examples where they're trying to define a little ditch. I'm slightly exaggerating, but a little ditch is part of the waterways of the United States. That's something we have to take a close look at. So we're examining that, and we're certainly going to weigh in, once again, to make sure that West Virginia legal interests are protected so that you don't have an overarching EPA that's setting these arbitrary rules that, quite frankly, have nothing to do with West Virginia and don't appropriately respect the role that the West Virginia State Legislature and the West Virginia State Government have to set our own destiny. We know how to regulate when it comes to a lot of these areas, and I think even what you saw happen this year after the chemical spill down in Charleston, you saw a lot of bipartisan activity come together in order to address some of those problems. I'd rather have West Virginia try to solve these problems than rely on the United States of America and its EPA to do it.
Maybe a comment and
Sure.
a direction for the state in growth, economic growth. You've mentioned how many 180 million people live within 10 hours of here. In the past, and our little town has a strawberry festival.
Which I probably walked in, so thank you.
Thank you for coming.
And thank you, yeah.
This is about agriculture and the growth of the family farm or co-op farms. We're trying to do everything we can. We bought a farm actually here in Upshur County for the school system and trying to increase FFA and 4-H involvement. But as a general direction, as a vision, what do you think the potential? You're from the Eastern Panhandle. I've been there before. The apple trees, the beaches, everything is wonderful there. But there's more that we can do. How can we promote small farming? Maybe it's educational efforts. Maybe it's a lot more than that.
Well, I think that farming represents an integral part of West Virginia's present and its future. And so I've had a lot of conversations with farmers, and I have tremendous respect for them. I think that we constantly need to look at different ways that we can expand our base in West Virginia. Now, I am from Jefferson County, and Jefferson County is really a wonderful place that I could see really developing from a farming perspective. One of the things that I've tried to do, I've had some conversations with Commissioner Helmick about this and with some different members of the legislature. I think we need to look closely at ways that we can expand the types of foods and crops that are grown here in West Virginia. I'll give you an example. I know that in Jefferson County, I've been approached by a number of people who have talked to me and they said, our soil is very similar to Northern Virginia. And in Northern Virginia, they have a booming new wine industry. And the types of grapes that could be planted in Jefferson County could be successful, were successful in Loudoun County and in Northern Virginia. Those are the kinds of things that we need to look at. The nature of the soil, the topography, the climate, to make sure that we're being rational about the kinds of opportunities we have to expand farming in the state of West Virginia. So I'm open to any ideas that people have in order to allow our state to grow in this particular area because I think it's an untapped potential.
I think one of the comments, maybe the direction to go in, the designation organic is a very valuable designation for the price of the product, but it's hard to get. The regulations make it harder for a small farmer to declare he's organic, maybe needlessly hard, and then it becomes something that a mass-produced farm in California can say, but it's hard for a small farmer to say.
Right.
And there could be a clarification legally about what can a local person do to call his apple organic.
Now that is the kind of issue that we do get involved in terms of words and their legal meaning. And obviously what we'd have to do is take a look at the law, because I'm a big believer that you look at the plain text and you come to some conclusions. But we're always happy to look at the law, and obviously work with legislators to change the law to make policies a little bit more rational. There are a lot of laws on the books that have been in place for decade upon decade upon decade. They need to be reviewed and potentially changed. So one of the things I would ask you to do tonight is, if you have ideas, I know that there are some members of the Farm Bureau here, if you guys have ideas about different things that you think our office can do, how we can use our legal authorities to help, we want to do that. But I benefit most when I get the good ideas from you, because there are certain things that I've spent a fair amount of time in my life. I'm a recovering healthcare lawyer. I was a healthcare regulatory lawyer for about 20 years. I spent a lot of time on that, but we're always looking to gather more information so we can make sure that we're putting West Virginia in the best possible place. So any idea that you have will be seriously considered. And the one thing I can tell you is that we do our best to be accessible. Pam Krashansky represents this region, and I think she's easily reached by everyone here in the room. Likewise, I try to make myself available, and I spend about an hour a day at minimum responding to a lot of constituent requests. I take that responsibility very seriously because I work for you. But if you have ideas, let me know. Send a letter. I also post on Facebook on a regular basis. Go to the Facebook site, submit a comment, and lo and behold, you may see me respond to you in real time, because I'm a big believer that we have to do that. But send me your ideas so we can do our best to develop these solutions which help West Virginia. All right, I think we have time, Pam, saying, for one more question. Anyone? Delegate.
I'll try it. I appreciate your comments on your substance abuse prevention task force. In 2010, Delegate Perdue and I ran a bill which was not successful, which put a 5 cents per bottle of beer tax, and we had that money dedicated to substance abuse prevention outpatient programs. I've found that over the past few years, there's a number of addicts out there. They don't have the resource, the money to go into, counseling and try to kick the habit. In 2010, of course, this figure now is probably more, but the estimate was about $26 million it would take to implement those substance abuse prevention programs, outpatient-wise. Do you have any feelings there on who would be the keeper of that money and would distribute it as to where the money would go? I know, 2017, our drug courts start in all 55 counties.
Right.
We have 15 now. Would that be something that your office could do, or should it come under the Supreme Court? I know DHHR is busy with.
Yeah. A couple thoughts. It's something that I'd want to have conversations with some of the relevant players, including the governor, DHHR, the West Virginia Supreme Court, in order to develop kind of a rational solution. Now, I do believe that it would help the state of West Virginia for the Attorney General's office to play a more aggressive coordinating role around the state, because while we've had a lot of very positive developments, I think the governor has done some good things in terms of his substance abuse task force. I think different state agencies have tried to do positive things to address substance abuse, but we've still lacked this coordinating function, which I think the state would benefit from. I think there is a real role for the Attorney General's office. Having said that, I'm not sure that we should be the keeper of the money, per se. You saw what happened in the past when the AG's office was the keeper of the money. So maybe there's some alternatives in terms of how some of the money gets distributed. The other way to think about it is we might be able to put together kind of a collaborative coalition, and when you're designing your programs to go at prevention, there should be a number of the stakeholders at the table. You always want to have the AG at the table. You want to have local law enforcement. You want to have the governor and his representatives of state agency. And then collaboratively, we can have a mechanism which I think addresses some of these issues. So I think it's a combination of a few different entities that probably want to be involved. That's probably one of my biggest takeaways from a lot of the work we've done on substance abuse. When I go and talk to the sheriffs, or I've talked to different entities around the state, they say we could use some more help. Just don't duplicate what other people are doing. So I think the best thing to do is make sure that everyone knows what everyone else is doing. And guess what? They don't right now in the state of West Virginia. And we could do a lot better that way. That's where I think we can have more of a collaborating, coordinating role. But to be clear, there's only so much we can do. We have 5 people who are doing substance abuse work, but they have other responsibilities as well. And so what we try to do is the best that we can in order to add a lot of value without duplicating. I think locking some of those responsibilities into statute will probably make a little bit of sense.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. This has been very valuable for me to learn what's on your minds. And rest assured, you will continue to see me in Upshur County and in all of the 55 counties. We try to work pretty long hours in the Attorney General's office, but ultimately, I want to make sure you know that we're not captured by the Golden Dome in Charleston. That ultimately, I work for you, and that the voices of Upshur County are worth every bit as much as any other county. Everyone does need to be treated the same. No favorites. And so I take that seriously, which is why I go to the large counties, but I also go to the smallest counties. And so any idea that you have is going to be taken seriously, and I'll do my best to address it. May not answer your question the way you like all the time, but at least you're going to generally get an answer to the question, and hopefully at least you'll know a little bit more about where we're coming from. So thank you all very much. Oh.
I would just like to say thank you for all the work that you're doing for the people of West Virginia. We appreciate it.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Patrick, go.
Well, thank you again. And by the way, I had a great time at the Strawberry Festival. It was a blast. So rest assured I'll be back at that as well. All right. Thank you.